Yeah?
Here in a second. All right, it's 2:30, so I'll call the meeting of the Kane County CARES Act Committee to order. Ask the clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Here.
Benyon, Perez,
Here.
Sanchez,
Here.
Surges? Thomas? Thomas? O'Shea?
Here. All right, we have a quorum. First item of business is approval of the minutes from August 3rd and August 17th. Actually, I'm sorry, it'll be August 3rd only. We're going to defer the 17th to next meeting. Mr. Fraz moves. Mr. Kenyon seconds. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson?
Aye.
Kenyon?
Yes.
Perez?
Yes.
Sanchez?
Yes.
Surges? O'Shea?
Yes. The minutes from August 3rd are approved. Public comment, we have a few people signed up this afternoon to address the committee. The first person I had signed up is Mr. Joe Jackson. Is Mr. Jackson here in the audience or online? Mr. Jackson,
I am here online. I apologize for not being.
all right, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And again, I apologize for not being there in person. It's the first day of e-learning and my 6 and 8-year-old daughters need a little bit of help today. So what I wanted to just bring to everybody's attention today, for the past 6 or so weeks, we at Hesed House have been going out to encampments all over the city of Aurora, asking people in those encampments to come into our shelter, come stay with us. We made most of those trips to one particular encampment, actually on Heard's Island. It has about 20 individuals or so staying there. Chuck Nelson, other members of the City of Aurora government have come out with us as well on occasion. If anybody isn't aware of this particular encampment, Denise Crosby just wrote an article that was published yesterday on them in the Beacon. The update from this encampment, though, is that this past Friday, the quote unquote mayor, and he actually was elected by residents of the encampment, brought himself and a number of his constituents into our comprehensive resource center, and they were tested for COVID by Aunt Martha's. The reason for this is they are, going to wait for those results to come back so they can then enter our shelter. The shelter that they're coming into is going to be our temporary warehouse shelter. I believe I spoke to this committee a number of weeks ago about this temporary warehouse shelter. But that shelter currently has air cooling units, protective fencing that keeps out individuals who have not had a negative COVID test in the last 15 days, portable toilets, hand washing stations, portable showers, all these things required for shelters according to Illinois Department of Public Health, City of Aurora, Kane County Health Department, and actually all provided through CARES Act funding by the Kane County Health Department. We are extremely grateful for these resources because they've allowed us to operate a shelter and provide shelter for about 137 individuals. We found out on Friday are going to be pulled away from our shelter. And what that means is that on September 11th, we can't operate that warehouse shelter and but at best 70 or so men or women are going to be on the streets without shelter, and at worst it's probably closer to a little over 100. And that includes these folks who just were tested, and we've worked so hard to rebuild trust, up to place blame on anyone. Again, I believe Barb's on the call. If anybody else from
Mr. Jackson, you're breaking up on your communication. We can't hear you clearly. Can you maybe adjust your microphone, please?
Bring this up because the last time I addressed the committee, I expressed how desperately Hesed House needs CARES Act funding to winterize this 680 South River Street temporary warehouse shelter. Sorry, I was disconnected, but I'm back on now. So the last time I addressed the committee, I mentioned how desperately we needed this additional CARES Act funding to winterize that 680 temporary shelter to provide shelter to individuals throughout the winter. Today, I address you again, reiterating that we desperately need that 500,000 to winterize the shelter. But we also last CARES Act allocation committee meeting where for the business grants, it was discussed one option being a 2-week application process followed by potentially a 2-week review process. Just to run that through, let's say in tomorrow's special meeting, you all get the grant program approved and everything is great, and even the application process starts tomorrow. If you ran that timeline out, that would mean there would not be a decision made until September 15th, meaning that there are 4 days where there are residents of Kane County, again, 70 to a little over 100, who have been out on the streets without shelter because that funding was not available during that time. I know the process that you all are
Mr.
going
Jackson,
through
I'd ask
is
that you
laborious,
please
and
wrap
trust
up
me,
your
I do not.
discussions, your
Yes.
comments. I mean, typically, we would limit comments to 3 minutes. If you could just conclude, I'd appreciate it. I apologize for not making that clear in the beginning.
Join, join. Cut her down to.
All right. I appreciate your comments, Mr. Jackson. We'll take that into account as we debate the specific issues that are before us today. The next person signed up to speak is Adrian Holloway. Is Adrian on the line?
Absolutely, no problem at all.
Hello? All right, we don't have Adrian Holloway. If Adrian comes back or signs in before we finish the public comment portion, we'll certainly give her an opportunity to speak. Lauren Rosenthal?
Hello,
Hello.
and thank you for giving me a few minutes today. I'm Lauren Rosenthal, Director of the Fox River Valley Public Library District, which serves 70,000 residents in the northeastern corner of Kane County. East Dundee, West Dundee, Carpentersville, Sleepy Hollow, Gilbert's, and portions of Elgin, Barrington Hills, and Algonquin. I'm here today to press for the CARES Act Allocation Committee to include library districts in CARES Act funding. I see the 2021 budget proposal subdepartment 6656 is for townships, park districts, and forest preserve expenses. I'm surprised to find library districts are not included in this line, nor are we included anywhere. While some libraries are component units of municipalities, of the 12 public libraries in Kane County, 11 of them are districts. And we have no access to CARES Act funding except directly through Kane County. And like townships, park districts, and forest preserve districts, we have been impacted by COVID-19 and incurred unanticipated expenses. We've all had to purchase PPE. We've all had additional cleaning supplies expenses. But there are things that you don't know that the library does. The library provides free internet access. Illinois is at 11.3% unemployment right now. Can you imagine trying to apply for a job without internet access? How about applying for unemployment benefits? School District 300 is only holding remote classes until the middle of October. How do students attend class without internet access? As a result of COVID, our library has installed an upgraded wireless antenna, so the entire parking lot has free high-speed internet access. Anyone can stream content on our grounds or in the parking lot. It's outside, they're providing safe social distancing. Every day we see patrons in the parking lot taking advantage of this service, and this was an unbudgeted expense. We also purchased wireless hotspots, which can be checked out, so residents who cannot afford internet access have free access in their home. Right now we have 50 of these hotspots, but we would like to purchase an additional 50 and have them check out for an entire semester to provide a break for families who are working from home and have their children attending school from home, or for families who unfortunately are not able to work right now and cannot afford a pricey internet bill. If we received funding, we could order these units immediately and they would be paid for in 2020. Will County has allocated $15,000 for each library district. Kane County Libraries provide additional myriad services for our residents, so I respectfully ask that we be included in your budget allocations. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that is signed up either today or in advance of the meeting or desires to address the committee during public comment? Ma'am?
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Mettle, CEO of the Gail Borden Public Library District in Elgin. And I would just like to continue with what Lauren was expressing today. We have gone to great lengths to prepare our buildings and our bookmobile. We have 3 buildings and a bookmobile to prepare them for the reopening to the public, which occurred in July. First of all, we had to make sure that our staff felt safe and returning to the building. And then, of course, inviting the public back in, our taxpayers, who were very, very anxious to get back to the library. One of the things that was critical for us, and as I explained to our board, was the access to computers. Lauren spoke about the internet access and the Wi-Fi. There are many people who do not have computers in our district, and they relied on them. Some of the stories we heard during this time through our reference line of people trying to apply for unemployment. And basically all we could say, I guess you have to use call because we are not open for the computer. We opened our computers before we opened to the buildings to the public. Computers by appointment. People came in, they were able to fill out government forms, unemployment, apply for positions, census, you name it. And they were so very, very grateful. But all of this comes at a cost, even to prepare our computers for use for the public. The plexiglass that had to be purchased in order to keep people safe and secure. To date, the Gail Borden Public Library District has spent $88,000 on COVID-related expenses. This is everything from PPE to plexiglass to all about basically making our buildings safe for the return of the public, of our taxpayers coming back into our buildings. So we would greatly appreciate this committee to recommend funding for our library districts here in Kane County. I did give Mr. Kenyon a list of those libraries. I have copies, if you would like, of the 11 libraries and the population served of those libraries in Kane County. So if you would like that, I could leave that here. Otherwise, Mr. Kenyon could make that information available. Thank you very much for listening to us, and please remember, libraries are critical. We consider ourselves essential workers, and if you would see the reaction of our public to the reopening of our library, you would know we are essential workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. Is there anyone else that would like to address the committee? Mayor Burns?
Good evening, or good afternoon, Mr. Hoshite and members of the committee, members of the board. I come to you with some reluctance, but I am obliged to ask of favor and consideration on behalf of the members of the Metro West Council of Government. I serve as president of that organization. My colleague, the executive director, is tuned in to this meeting. Earlier this morning, we received an email back from the U.S. Treasury Department stating, and I quote, "We've checked again with the department program officials and are advised that the updated guidance has been developed and will, in its final form, be presented to you shortly. We will get it to you as soon as we get it." I share that with you because following the August 17th webinar, several questions still exist from member communities of Metro West. One is, does budgeted versus unbudgeted public safety payroll and expenses comply, Kane County is having serious debate about what COVID expenses can be claimed for CARES Act funding and whether all previously budgeted expenses are eligible. Another question that is not yet clarified, what is actually a COVID-related public safety expense? Kane County's local guidance is saying reimbursement for fire and police service payroll must be shown as being directly attributable to COVID-based response and not a response to, for example, a car crash. And number three, can a municipality claim 100% of fire or police officers' payroll and other expenses if the municipality certifies that they are indeed 100% COVID-related? And would Treasury challenge that claim? We emailed out to the Treasury Department last week and we received the response I just shared with you this morning at 10 a.m. We are concerned that if our city staff throughout Kane County start providing responses with respect to the questionnaire, those responses, depending on the Treasury's final review and judgment, will have to be amended considerably. Therefore, respectfully, Mr. Hoshite, members of the committee, we are, on behalf of the Metro West Council of Government, asking for, at the very least, a 1 week, at the most, a 2-week delay in the submittal of our applications. So from September 4th to at least September 11th, or perhaps September 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Burns. The Treasury regulations that are applicable are conflicting. And they originally started out by saying that we couldn't consider lost revenue. And obviously, if they would have allowed lost revenue, it would have made the process much easier. Then they said initially that we had to have the expenses be COVID related, so incremental COVID costs. And that was what most people were thinking would be the rules. Then they changed the regulations or added additional regulation that said, in order to eliminate the debate about whether police and fire are COVID related, we'll assume they're all related and avoid that issue. Unless the governing supervisor for the police and fire in the given jurisdiction says otherwise. So if the city of Geneva, for example, submitted 100% of its police and fire, we wouldn't question that technically unless someone in the city said it wasn't. But then they went on to say in the next round of regulations that in considering COVID-related expenses, we can't reimburse items to the extent they were already in your budget. So that concept directly conflicts with the prior clarification they tried to make. And it's interesting, I've asked the state's attorney to look into this, what other counties are doing, because one of the concerns about Kane was that we were a little bit slow getting out of the gate. And we've pushed this process forward as quickly as we can so that we can accommodate the municipalities. And it's interesting you're here now suggesting that we slow the process down. But I'm certainly would think the difficulty now, what we've done is kind of kick the can down the road to our consultant in our state's attorney's office, who now would be receiving applications and having to give us an opinion as to whether the requested expenses are permissible or not. And because of that inconsistency in the regulations, it would be great if we got a clarifying modification of the regulations. Or better yet, it would be better if they could just modify the regulations to say, we'll change it to lost revenue. And in that instance, we wouldn't have to go through that deliberative process. So I think the committee understands the concern that you raise here, and we're prepared to deal with that. Okay. Recognizing that we've been moving this along, it seems like we have weekly meetings here, and little by little we've been getting toward the finish line. But if it makes sense, because we're going to get some clarifying regulation that comes out, it'll make the state's attorney's job and our consultant job a lot easier. And I would just suggest that everyone that's involved in this process, to the extent you have influence on this is a federal issue, really. It's your local congressmen and states or U.S. senators from Illinois to get clarification for this. This is not just an Illinois issue, it's a multi-state issue. But it seems to me one of the reasons they allocated Kane County's money to the county was that we could get it out more quickly. Well, What's slowing this up is this conflicting provision in the regulations. So I appreciate your comment. We'll talk about that in the business side of the meeting today. I would encourage the cities to still be putting together their applications so that we don't get delayed once we get clarification, because our goal is to get the money out of our coffers and into your coffers as soon as we can.
Appreciate it. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all. Thank you.
All right, anyone else from the audience that would like to address the committee this morning? Anyone online? Adrian Holloway? No? Okay. All right, then we'll go on to our business part of our agenda for discussion items. The first item is status of funds. Mr. Rickert, any change?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we started with $92,900,217.90. We've accumulated $104,264.92 in interest. We now have a balance of $93,004,482.82.
All right, and by regulation, all interest earned on the funds goes into the fund for allocation. We've set up a contingency fund when we did our initial allocations, and just for sake of tracking, those funds will go into the contingency fund and be used accordingly. Any questions of our treasurer?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rickert. Application process, I know that's underway. Mr. McMahon, do you want to give us a brief just summary of what applications have gone out and where we stand?
Sure. All the municipal applications have gone out, as you've heard this afternoon. But then Friday, I believe, the applications to the other units of local government were distributed as well. So that include fire districts, townships, park districts, and forest preserve districts. We have a webinar scheduled. I provided kind of a timeline that kind of lays out the webinars for the various programs, and that process is moving forward.
All right, it would be appropriate at this point to address the concerns that Mayor Burns has raised. The timeframe for municipal applications, we had set a goal to send those out. We had a webinar that was an information exchange to assist in preparing the applications. We, I believe, had a 14-day response period. Is that?
We did. So on August 13th, an award letter went out to each municipality. On August 18th, we hosted a webinar partnered with our consultant, KEB. We had approximately, I think, 68 participants on that webinar. There was some interactive questions during the webinar, and then we followed up with questions that were submitted via email or through the chat function that we were unable to answer during the course of the webinar. The application portal was opened on August 21st, meaning the municipalities could begin submitting their application, and those applications are due September 4th back to the counties.
If you, well, you've heard the discussion that Mayor Burns raised and my response. What is the state's attorney's position regarding extending the time frame to see if we get clarification?
Well, I agree with your response, and I would love clarification on these issues. That would make our process much simpler. It would simplify the ability of reviewing the applications and the documentation that they submit. But we just have not received that clarification from the Treasury Department, and it has been conflicting, as you, Mr. Chairman, just described. We're under a really tight time schedule here already. As you all know, this money has to be distributed and spent by December 30th. And just to kind of give you an example, you're going to consider the not-for-profit program here, I think, this afternoon. And under the timeline that we laid out, a really tight 2-week timeline, when we make the applications available, host the webinar, applications are due, I have to build in time to review the application. I have to build in time to review the documentation that the not-for-profit or whatever the entity is, this is just an example, is going to submit. So our consultant can review that, our internal team can review that, and we can conduct a legal review. The not-for-profit, that's assuming you approve it today. It moves to the special county board meeting that you've scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, I think. We're we're talking about a mid-December release of funds. So extending application deadlines and extending these deadlines further out is going to put even more pressure on this committee and this board to get that money into the hands of the recipients that need the resources. So I understand the concerns. I think I agree with the concerns. Mayor Burns talked about some of the frustrations that we've all had with the guidance that has come from the Treasury Department. But right now, I'm kind of having to make decisions and recommendations to you, quite honestly, on incomplete information and imperfect information that we're getting from the Treasury Department. So I don't want you to extend the deadline. If you do, we'll do everything we can to comply with that, to give Treasury a little bit more time to give the municipalities, me, all of us, clarification.
All right, so I guess one follow-up question I have, because I know the rules are the rules, but sometimes there's safety in numbers. Is it possible to get input from the state of Illinois? I know the state and other parts of the state is being the direct dispersing party to the cities and municipalities, except up in this 5-county region where they allocated the money to the counties to allocate. Can we see what the state of Illinois is doing and the other counties are doing, so that we can get some point of reference to whether we're making an issue that is valid or otherwise?
Absolutely. I'm open to that guidance, that suggestion, and kind of conduct what other state agencies are doing. We do have regular communication with our surrounding counties, so we're talking to them about how they're taking applications in their timeline, but I have not done outreach to the state. We will do that, yes.
All right, so a practical approach to dealing with this issue, we could do one of a couple things. This committee's been committed to meet frequently so that we can develop the programs and address the concerns as they come up. We could either act on Mayor Burns' request and extend the time frame for 1 week, knowing that if we get clarification sooner, then we'll just be delayed a week. The other alternative is to see what happens in the next week and just leave things intact, and knowing that we could adjust it a week in advance of the September 4th deadline. I know we have a holiday coming up, so that's going to interfere with our Monday meeting schedule.
Mr. Chairman, so the timeline that we've laid out that is now on the screen in front of you, we have a date there. I'm colorblind, so I can't kind of tell you the headers, but it looks like the third header to me. It's October, if you go down to October 15th. That's a deadline for municipalities to come back to us with modifications to their applications. So there is a little bit of flexibility built in. So we have a deadline of September 4th for the municipalities, but they then have the ability to come back to us until October 15th with an amended application. I think that gives them a little bit extra time to get guidance, and not them, but gives all of us a little bit more time to get guidance from the Treasury Department. And then if we get that further clarification and they amend their application, then we could include other requests for reimbursement in that application
Before we were to allocate uncommitted funds.
before we're actually sending money out to municipalities.
All right, so what's the pleasure of the committee regarding the application process for the municipalities that, and this concern is primarily relates to entities that provide police and fire services. The other governmental entities, like the Forest Preserve District, the park districts, townships, don't have that issue because that exception that was carved out was only for police and fire, correct?
That's correct. Now, some of the forest preserve districts do have a law enforcement component, but the big issue is with the municipalities, the public safety piece. And if we got that clarification, that would alleviate a lot of the issues that have been raised.
All right. I guess my inclination as chairman is to leave in place our current schedule, knowing that we understand the issue and we'll deal with it and incorporate flexibility, certainly, if we get some change in course. it just points out the need to turn up the pressure to have the Treasury regulations modified as soon as we can. You know, we're up against this time frame, which makes it really a challenge. And of course, the need for the cities and everyone else involved to deal with their budgets for this year and next. So is that okay with the committee? We'll keep this as an agenda item. We'll see where we go. Hopefully within the next week, we'll get some clarification. All right, item C, the indemnity intergovernmental agreements. There's nothing more to comment on there. Is there, Mr. McMahon?
Nothing new from last week. Those will be finalized after we get the application back, and then we work with the municipalities, but nothing new.
All right, two of the primary business issues for the committee today were finalizing the criteria for the business grant program as well as a not-for-profit program. In fact, just to jump ahead, Mr. Sanchez, with the help of some of the other board members, set up a special board meeting tomorrow so that if we're successful in advancing a program, either under the business side or the not-for-profit side, we could get that to a full board vote tomorrow at 3:45 before our regularly scheduled committee, the whole meeting. So I want to thank Mr. Sanchez for doing that. You know, the feedback we get from constituents and especially the business owners and the not-for-profits, as we heard from Hesed House today and some of the other social service organizations, is the need not only exists, but the sooner the better. And so if we can get these programs in place, we'll be in good shape. Everyone should have received from the state's attorney's office, and we'll cover small business grants first, the outline for the executive summary for the grant program. And then there was also a separate executive summary for the not-for-profit program. But what I'd like to do is cover the business grant program first, if we could. And again, both of these programs, if approved today or modified today, will be incorporated in a resolution that we'll consider at the end of the meeting or once we conclude the discussion on these issues. I did have just one comment on the executive summary for the business grant program that I discussed with Assistant State's Attorney, Mr. Lulvis, before our meeting. Just if we look at the outline, and again, I want to thank the State's Attorney Office for putting this together, because this does it did incorporate the issues that were agreed on by consensus at our last meeting. But under the applicant eligibility section, there were 5 criteria included in there. And with respect to item number 4, which read properly, one of the criteria was that if the entity had gross revenue in 2019 of less than 2.5 million, they would be a qualifying entity. But that would be for the $20,000 grant program. So what I suggested we do is modify this to say that in order to qualify for the $20,000 program, you had to have gross revenue in 2019 for less than 2.5 million. And then we would add a new number 5 that said that if your entity was formed after 1/1 of 19, then you had to certify that your expected revenue was less than 2.5 million, and you would then fall in the $10,000 grant criteria. So we would just add a new number 5 to clarify that. Now, if you look at the grant terms section, which is below that, it clearly spells out that distinction, but someone reading this application may stop under the applicant eligibility section if they were formed after 2019. So I think adding that additional sentence would be appropriate. Mr. Sanchez?
Which document are you referring?
I'm looking at the business grant executive summary that was emailed out.
I don't think I got a copy of that. I don't know.
Jeez.
I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
Who was that? Did you get it?
Obviously, somebody from Campton.
Appreciate it. Sorry about that.
All right, well, it's attached. There's also a draft resolution here that was handed out for the meeting today. Do you have that?
Yeah.
All right, it's the attachment to that
Okay.
that
It just wasn't at the seat then.
document. Okay, so again, just referencing the changes, paragraph 4 would be clarified to say that that applied to the $20,000 grant program, and paragraph, and the new paragraph 5 would be inserted, spelling out the criteria for the $10,000 grant program. All right, other than that change in criteria, I think that what we have in front of us is consistent with what we had approved last month, or I'm sorry, last week. Are there any other clarifications or comments about the business grant program as proposed? Mr. Hanson,
Yeah, under eligibility,
could you speak into your microphone, please?
sorry, thank you, good afternoon. Regarding the eligibility, something that I flagged to other CAT committee members is the desire to be eligible, that the business is up and functioning now. I don't think we're a business rescue program, or it may not be designed for that. I'd like to reward the businesses that are doing their best to get back underway. I don't know if that has to be a set date of whatever, it's August the 1st or September the 1st, but I'd like to make sure this aid goes out to businesses that are actually operational right now.
John, is there a way to, under eligibility number 5, where it discusses good standing, could that be modified in there that, I mean, a simple.
Sure, you could
In
clarify that,
business-
right. A good fit, we could, and that is going to be the new number 6, but certainly.
Correct,
All
correct.
right, that would, the requirement that they be in good standing with all applicable federal, state, and local standards and requirements, and open for business as of a certain date.
Would that satisfy your needs?
It's a will of the committee. I believe in it strongly, but it's up to the committee.
Is the committee consensus that that would be an acceptable inclusion? How about August
Yes.
1st is the date? Is that, all right. All right, any other clarifications that, or modifications that the committee has or would like to suggest? Ms. Thomas?
Not so much about eligibility, and I don't know if I'm skipping ahead here, but with respect to the application, I sent everyone an email today, so I apologize for the short notice, saying that I recognize we don't have the time and bandwidth to confirm someone's designation as a minority or veteran-owned business, but I would still like to track that. So if we could just simply ask and to see, what the response is.
Is there any objection to adding that to the application?
Just simply asking for people to self-identify as minority or veteran-owned business.
Even though that would not be taken into account in
Correct,
determining eligibility.
correct.
All right. Mr. Berger, no objection to doing that? All right, so we could include that in the
We will.
questionnaire or the application.
Yes, I will. Ms. Thomas sent us some language this afternoon. We'll build that into the application.
All right, Mr. Hanson?
Thanks again. I also believe there should be some sort of measuring stick for businesses that have actually endured a hardship through this. As it currently reads, really anyone can apply, whether if they incurred economic loss or hardship or not. And it doesn't have to be a complicated measuring stick. But is there a way to build language into this grant program that will indicate for a business of any type that qualifies under all the other requirements that they've actually been hurt from this pandemic?
All right, we've made it clear under the eligible expense paragraph that there is a requirement that, number one, they weren't reimbursed from another program. But Mr. McMahon, do you want to comment on that?
No, we can try to build in some language that would require the applicant to certify some type of business loss between quarters, between annual reporting period, whatever. We can try to come up. I think I understand the concept. You want to provide resources if this is what this committee wants to do. But the concept is that resources would be provided to companies who suffered some type of loss, some type of hardship, as opposed to some business that may have had a record-breaking quarter, year, whatever, because of the change in business and increases in demand. I understand the concept. We'll try to put that into words and build that into an application.
Thank you. And with that, I've mentioned it in other email correspondence to folks here, yourself included. If nothing more than a flag, as a question in the application, was the business closed during phase 2 or phase 3? That right there is an automatic indicator that they've been hurt. Meaning phase 2 or phase 3 of the Restore Illinois plan.
Mr. Surgis?
I just want to echo the phasing portion there. To me, it seems like if we find ourselves in a position of identifying those businesses that were more hurt or less hurt than others, the businesses that were forcibly closed during those phase 2, phase 3, the longest, Scott, those would just seem to me to be natural.
Just to be clear, we've set up a program here in front of you today that gives a yes/no answer. So businesses that are eligible get grants. Those that aren't, don't. So I would just ask the committee today whether you are looking for us to establish priorities for the order of the grants, or if you are looking for us to build into the program requirements that, if they're not met, result in a no answer.
I think I can, the direction the committee gave last week was that we weren't going to go through that process. We were going to require a hardship, as has been suggested, of at least a certification of hardship from the applicant in the application. We also said, as is indicated here, they couldn't have been reimbursed from another program. The addition of the language that said they had to be open for business would be consistent with our wishes, but we didn't get into the issue of minority. That was brought up, and we specifically said we weren't going to do that. Veteran-owned business was not going to be a criteria. If we're going to get into anything more specific, then we need to open it up for discussion again.
Okay, so how open? Are we talking about 5 hours a week or 40? I mean, that's a question that we would ask, because we have to be able to set up guidelines that result in a green light or a red light for eligibility. So, I would suggest to you that if you want us to document a financial loss, we would likely look at 2 years of financial information and try to tie whether or not there was a demonstrated loss in revenue on a quarter-over-quarter basis, or perhaps year to date. And I haven't given that more thought at this point, but we can do that. For businesses that are more newly established, they don't have a financial record that we can evaluate for eligibility. So I don't know if you want to provide funding to more newly established businesses, then the revenue loss is not going to be as relevant or as measurable in the evaluation process.
Right. And all of these comments and concerns are totally legitimate to ask. The question is, with the time frame we've got here, we could go down a path of debating for 2 months what additional criteria we want to put into this program. And that's the challenge we face. So, if we want to get this program up and running, I think we chose last week a more streamlined process. If we're now going to get into evaluating economic criteria, we have to spell out what documents they have to be willing to provide us so that you can perform that analysis properly.
It's not impossible, it's just nuanced is all I'm saying.
Right.
John, one of the questions I had after the meeting last week was, in reading this, if a company was to have received PPP for their payroll, but still suffered losses elsewhere, are those other losses, can they be turned in? Or Scott, are you looking at this saying if they turned in PPP, they're disqualified from this program?
So 2 things. Number 1, no, receiving assistance through the payroll protection program in these guidelines does not preclude you from participating in this program. But number 2, we are not reimbursing businesses for lost revenue. These guidelines establish eligible expenses that they can get reimbursed for. So this program, as we've designed it so far, is focused on providing resources to cover specific expenses.
Good answer.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Thomas.
So one indicator of hardship is how long a business was closed. And we discussed maybe giving priority to businesses closed through phase 3 of the Restore Illinois plan. Am I overlooking that in this
I don't, that
outline?
we discussed it, but we didn't make it part of the program that we advanced.
Well, I think that's an easy way to say, okay, who should go to the top of the list? That's not, time consuming.
I understand that's your position, but that wasn't the will of the committee. So if the committee, if you want to change the
Well, I'm
committee's
reintroducing the
direction-
question because we're talking about it again, so.
All right, does the committee have the desire to add additional criteria to make the grant, to create a tiered process of priority?
So if I can speak to
Yes.
that, what that sounds like to me is that I have a box on my application form that asks the organization, the business to self-certify whether or not they were closed. I have no way to go back in time and verify whether somebody had an open or closed sign in their window, no way to verify that. So it would just simply be, answer the question honestly, tell us if you were closed during any of these phases, and I would suggest that if we did that, we would still recognize the validity of the order of submission, which is a driver for how we process these applications, except that we would lift all those that check the box that they were closed to the very top of that list. And all it's going to result in is maybe somebody gets their grant paperwork a day or two earlier than somebody else. I don't think it would have any measurable impact on the level of assistance that you are willing to provide them. It's simply an order of priority for staff to review applications for completeness, and then we would reorder the priority list, or the order of contact is what I would say. It's not so much a priority as it is just simply the order that we're going to follow to notify the businesses of their eligibility and their award amount, giving them their grant paperwork, and then instructing them how to obtain reimbursement for eligible expenses.
If I hear Ms. Thomas correctly, though, I don't think that's what she's suggesting. I'm thinking she's suggesting that if we have more applications than available funds, that we would first fund those that were closed.
We could use that very same.
Correct.
Yeah, we could apply it in that way as well.
I mean, grocery stores, they've put in protective barriers and they have the need for sanitizer, but they've remained open, so that's just a very easy example to point to,
Well, keep in mind, with the previous points that have been made, I don't know that grocery stores will be eligible if they don't have a demonstrated financial loss. I would say grocery stores are probably among the businesses that have actually done better.
Plus, they may
financially.
fall out on revenue criteria or
Or
number
the
of
number of
employees.
full-time equivalent employees, exactly.
Right. All right, so Ms. Thomas is reintroducing the criteria of prioritizing qualifications for the business grant. Is there anyone else on the committee that is inclined to support that? Mr. Franz?
I think it's reasonable. I think Matt has talked about that previously, and it sounds like it wouldn't be that much of a burden on staff. So, as a decision point and priority, I think it's a fair way to go. And some
Well, it
businesses
sounds
were
to me-
ordered to
It
close.
sounds to me like what you're proposing is that would be a factor that would drive the awards only in the event we have more than $8 million in eligible applications.
Correct.
Correct.
Otherwise, it'd be an irrelevant issue.
All right, so then if, Mr. Sanchez, you're nodding your head, so I assume that's a consensus from you?
Yes, I agree.
Mr. Surgis?
Okay with that.
All right, Kenyon?
If staff can work with it, it's fine.
All right, so then we need to define what that means, because phase 2, phase 3, I don't know what the definition of that is. Are we simply going to ask if the business was closed for a period of time due to the COVID restrictions, or are we going to put a specific phase as a criteria, and then we would need to define that?
I mean, I think we should use the list that's in the Restore Illinois plan from the governor's office.
Mr. Berger, do you have a suggestion?
We can take a look at that. I'm not familiar with that list.
I agree. Don't reinvent the list.
All right, so the consensus is the committee is to add that requirement as well, whatever that is. Right? I mean, you know specifically,
I can send everybody the plan.
So
Mr. Sanchez?
My thinking is that these could be, like Mr. Berger said, just boxes that they check, but we could have two separate ones for phase 2, phase 3. Were you closed during phase 2? Yes. Were you closed during phase 3? That's going to be a smaller pool of businesses that were closed all the way through phase 3. So that's just a further way to prioritize if we get.
I guess my point is this, I think phase 2 was much, if I'm trying to understand Ms. Thomas's concern, if a restaurant was closed because restaurants couldn't be open versus auto repair business, which could be open, that the restaurant would qualify first if there were two competing applications.
Correct.
Okay, so that doesn't, in my, again, I have an understanding generally what different phases were, but I think we could simplify the process if we simply said, phase 2, as I understood it, was a mandatory shutdown for certain types of business, or that would gather, that would have more than a certain number of people involved, that kind of thing. Mr. McMahon?
So I'm not familiar enough with the specifics of phase 2 and phase 3. We have the Restore Illinois plan. And so if the will of the committee is to require organizations to check where they shut down in phase 2, where they shut down in phase 3, we can prioritize those as you direct us.
Do we want to make a distinction between phases 2 and 3, or can we just say phase 2, which was the initial shutdown that was more broad, would be the criteria that we would use?
I could ask, I mean, what do you mean by shut down? Do you mean restaurants that couldn't have patrons in at tables? Or do you mean restaurants that just chose to turn the sign over to closed and go home? And what about remote working? What about businesses that might have been, their door might have been locked, but their staff were home working?
Right.
Is that closed? I
And
don't.
what about restaurants that did carry out only, but had significant reductions in revenue,
Right.
barely stayed alive? I mean, how does that criteria get, how do we define that?
But we're not covering lost revenue. So everyone lost revenue.
No, not everyone.
Well, I
Some
mean, no,
business-
not everyone.
Oh,
The
yeah.
grocery store, right,
Clean-
not everyone.
A janitorial service, a cleaning service might have gotten extra business as a result.
The
of
point
Right, I
is,
mean, those businesses we're not even going to be looking at,
well,
so.
the point is that the manner in which you ask the question can have a different outcome. So if you ask two restaurants that are next door to each other, one that had no carry out and the other one that had carry out, both of them had significant negative economic impact because carry out business could have been very limited, particularly if they weren't already a carry out business. I would expect that we would want to treat both those the same, even though that the other, they would have had, one could say I was completely shut down versus the other one saying I was open enough to keep my few employees employed.
So again, isn't the length of closure some indicator of hardship?
Can I weigh in here, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So it sounds to me, two issues here. I need a program that we can administer and we can administer timely. That's the first issue. Second, the goal here is to get help to businesses that suffered economic hardship. And me kind of parsing through, or my team parsing through businesses that were partially open or open for carry out only, and others were open for outdoor seating or space, that complicates the review and the documentation that I'm going to get in from these various businesses. And I understand the goal. The goal is to get help to businesses that suffered a hardship. I think if we limit it to that question, we reimburse eligible expenses, then I think we've accomplished the goal that all of you are trying to accomplish: money to businesses that suffered a downturn. Trying to figure out a business that was shut down in phase 2 and phase 3 versus one that was shut down just in maybe phase 3, and kind of weighing the different economic hardship between the two, that's going to be a difficult task. That's going to slow this process down.
I'd say that if we're going to get into that analysis, we won't be, needing our special meeting tomorrow, that's for sure. Mr. Hanson?
Phase 2 was much more restricted than phase 3, and we didn't jump to phase 3 overnight. There were some businesses that definitely created a plan, how, no matter how limited, to try to open up when we did enter phase 3 as a state. So if for simplicity and streamlining things, I like phase 2 being a measuring stick. Retail areas and the places that generate revenue for our county, where they were ghost towns during phase 2. If phase 3 overcomplicates things, let's use phase 2 as a measuring stick.
And maybe the question should be, instead of where you close down, did phase 2 requirements have a significant negative impact on your business? I think that's probably would make that distinction. And that's, again, something that Scott's not going to verify, but it would have to be something they would attest to in their application. Because again, I think if you're going to take two similar businesses in my example, the business that stayed open for carryout may have actually lost more money than the business that was open. And so I don't think we want to get a closed down versus a business that limped along if they both had similar restrictions on their ability to operate. Mr. Berger?
So do I understand that the committee doesn't want any business that didn't see a financial loss to be assisted under this program, and that you want us to lift businesses that suffered some sort of closure in addition to their financial loss to be raised up to the top of the list, especially in the event the fund is oversubscribed beyond 8 million?
I think the answer to your question is yes to number one. With respect to number two, that only becomes relevant if we have more applications and available funds.
And so is it any closure of any kind gets you to the top of the list? Or is it closure for an extended period of time? Is it phase 2, all of phase 2?
Well, we didn't use the word enclosure. We're trying to get away from that on this distinction.
Okay.
It would be significant negative impact as a result of the phase 2 restrictions. Is that acceptable, or are we going to?
Well, we're already going to review the financials to confirm that they did suffer a reduction in revenue. So that question, I think, will be answered, whether they were open, closed, partially open, partially closed, whatever. I don't know if that's as relevant. You know, once we've demonstrated that there's a financial loss, and we presume that's due to COVID-19, it may not be, but I mean, a business may have suffered a loss regardless, but I'm just asking so I understand kind of how you want this managed.
Mr. Sanchez?
Considering prioritization, would it be better to maybe just go off of the businesses that had a full year of 2019 that are applicable for the $20,000 and prioritize them first over the newer businesses? Is that maybe a better way to slice it if we're going to try and prioritize in the event of too many asks?
Now, that's a different criteria as well that you could implement into the program. Certainly, we could, that's another option for change here. But again, last week, as we put this program forth, we came up with a two-tiered program and didn't prioritize one over the other.
No, I understand that. It's just because we're talking about the possibility of prioritizing people if there's not enough money for everyone. So, and this one seems to be a bit nuanced and complicated. Just another idea. Regarding all of this, it seems though in the language of the resolution, we can still pass it tomorrow and still figure out some of these things with your two offices, the way I'm understanding the resolution.
But we need to, I mean, I think we have to have the basic structure of the program so that we can, when we present this to the board as a whole, we include all these criteria so they can understand it.
John, I thought Mr. Berger's comments were exactly what was going through my mind. Very eloquent.
Regarding financial loss?
Yes.
So
You have the court reporter read that back?
Well, to recap, so what I'm hearing is that we need to obviously require businesses to furnish us with their financial records for multiple years. And I would suspect that we will be through the end of June, second quarter of 2020. And I would suspect that we're going to be focused on the period of March 1st to June 30th. And we're either gonna do year-to-date financial revenues year over year, or we're gonna do a quarter. It would be maybe April, May, June compared to 2020 compared to 2019. And it would simply be a yes or no question. Did you have lower revenues or not? And if
But
you
we're
didn't
not-
have, if you didn't have lower revenues, not
That
eligible.
we can't do that for a couple reasons. This isn't a revenue replacement grant program. It can't be by its own guidelines. It can't take into account lost revenue. The way we set this up is,
So this isn't about eligible. I'm not saying then the lost
plus
revenue is
we have a
eligible
period
expense.
that goes beyond June 30th. I mean, the eligible expense period is through December 30th.
Again, I'm not suggesting that we would then give them money to replace their revenue that was lost. I'm just suggesting that this would be a way to test for eligibility.
Well, one of the concerns that I had is setting up this program in the first instance is that our staff would have the time and ability to evaluate everything that comes in. If we're going to start requiring financial statements, which really wasn't discussed last week, as a part of the criteria, that creates another whole analysis, which, I'm, again, with enough time, and I know that the concern is if we cut corners or aren't as detailed as you would want us to be, that someone may take advantage of the program, but we also have to have something that's realistic that we can get out and get turned around.
So what we presented to you today is a very, it's a program aimed at expeditious implementation, defining small businesses, offering them funding to reimburse them for certain expenses, most of which are directly related to COVID-19.
But as we add these changes that we're suggesting today, then we bring in the other layers of complexity.
Correct.
All right, so just to summarize what we've done so far, we've included language about hardship that's going to be written in there. That's not going to substantially change what we've talked about, but it's going to be some statement to that effect. We put in a requirement that they be open for business August 1st. You asked the question about how many hours. I think, if we have to be open for business, what did your term open for business mean, Mr. Hanson?
I guess I didn't put that much thought into what that had to require. If there's places that have not reopened,
Or
they're
how
not
to
open.
verify it.
I mean, you can pick up the phone and call them and see if they're there. I don't know, but there's some places that have not reopened, and I'm inclined to not lend this aid to them.
All right, so you're saying, well, then is open for business in your world mean that they're simply functioning and operating, whether it's 5 hours a week or 40 hours a week? Such that we wouldn't have a criteria, just a statement that they're open for business in the application? Or do we have a certain time criteria?
I hadn't considered a certain time criterion. I know many establishments have reduced their hours or the way they do things.
Well, and also, what about businesses that don't have orders right now? I have friends that own a gourmet ice cream manufacturing business. They're not closed, but they haven't had orders since March. So I don't know if they're open or closed. It sounds to me like they're not in production, but they're, could be if they received orders.
Ms. Thomas?
So my concern of what do we do if the request for funds exceeds funds is answered. So my apologies. I mean, it simply says that awards will be issued on a first come, first qualified, first served basis. So we may not like that, but I mean, that kind of addresses the issue, so.
All right, we got to take each issue as we address it. I know we've covered a number of them. I'm just trying to cover what we've modified from the original program. So,
And I feel like I opened the can of worms here. So, I mean, if this whole phase 2, phase 3 is too complicated, and it sounds like it's becoming complicated, I mean, first come, first serve, and it's already in here.
okay. Well, Mr. Hanson, I want to finish this discussion on open for business. Mr. Berger, what level of detail do you need in our application if we're going to include something, that term in our program?
All I need from you is an indicator that you are comfortable with us crafting a standard that is a yes, no eligibility question. So again, I'm taking away here that you don't want any business that hasn't seen a revenue decline to be considered eligible. I think I'm getting, am I wrong?
No.
Okay. I thought I got that
John?
sense.
No. Well, does this
Oh.
relate to
So
the
I'm-
open for business issue?
I think what I'm hearing the goal to be is that if the business is permanently closed and not reopening, we don't want to give them money. We want that money to go to the businesses that are trying to stay open. Does that help with any clarity, or am I off base on that?
Well, it sounds like what you want is a question on the application. Have you been closed? And if you are closed now, are you going to reopen? I have to take them at their word. I don't have a way to verify that.
And there may not be a qualifier for
Right.
that, but simply put, have you closed your business without plans to reopen? Yes. Okay, then you're in the no pile.
Now, that's different than what we had talked about before, which required an August 1st reopening. So we either are going to have a standard that they're open for business. Now we're talking about, are you planning to reopen? I think there's a distinction between that and a business that's open August
From
1st.
a business that's planning not to reopen. If you've closed permanently, that disqualifies you from the funds. Unless I'm mistaken on that, that was my intention.
Well, and to be honest with you, there may be businesses out there that are shutting down and yet they haven't paid their rent for 3 months. And your funding opportunity is going to give them an ability to pay their rent and finish the close down and the wind down of their business. I don't know if that's what you want.
The consensus of the committee on this issue before was that the business had to be open for business as of August 1. That's what we agreed the consensus was. Mr. Berger's response was, what does open mean? Do we want to define a specific number of hours per week, or we just want some statement that they're open for business?
Open for business.
Are we good with that as a criteria? So someone who isn't open for business and hasn't decided whether they're closing would be ineligible in that context. All right, so we're good on that issue. Then on the, Ms. Thomas, you had suggested a criteria if they were phase 2 had a negative impact on their business, that we should at least ask that question so that we could prioritize if we had more grant applications and we had funds available. Is that something we still want to include, given the first come, first served basis of the program, or not? The committee consensus was to include it. I'm not trying to sway either way. We just have to give staff direction. And they've got to have this word processed before our meeting tomorrow. Mr. Frost?
I'm not opposed just to have a simple box check that might help staff in their decision process to say, were you required to be closed under, phase 2 restrictions? It wouldn't be a deal breaker. It wouldn't.
Okay.
The only reason I care about that at all is if you want it to drive a yes, no decision. I don't need to know if they were closed. It doesn't matter to me unless you tell me that if they weren't closed, they can't get a grant.
I guess I'm just thinking in terms of the, if the funds, the requests exceed the funds and we had to whittle down the group, that may.
All right, can I maybe suggest a more, as we talk about this, if we put in language that says, was any portion of your operation shut down during phase 2? And just, we know that, okay? So that would create the distinction between someone that's doing, I'm going to use a different analogy that has no bearing on this, but I'll give you an example. The courts were closed completely except for emergency cases. So if a law firm was qualifying, they did 100% litigation, their business would be much more significantly impacted than a business law firm that did a lot of transactional work that stayed busy. So the litigation part of the practice would be closed down. It's just like the restaurant. The dine-in part would be closed down and the carry-out wasn't. I think our goal is, if we're going to give priority, it's to those businesses that were closed down. But the problem comes in, and the issue is, what does closed down mean?
But again, you're talking about a criteria that doesn't even matter unless we're oversubscribed.
Correct.
Got it.
So do we ask the question to give us something to consider if we're oversubscribed or not?
Yes.
Yeah, I would rather, because, I mean, first come, first serve, it makes sense, but the smaller businesses may not have the capacity to get it in as quickly as, a firm with 50 people, so, organization with 50 people, so, or a chamber member, so.
All right, so do you understand, Mr. Berger, what the languages we're looking for?
Yes, I'm simply going to ask all the applicants to indicate whether they were in any way affected by the close down order in any phase of the governor's plan. And in the event we have applications totaling in excess of $8 million, the ones that answer yes will be taken to the very top of the list and will award accordingly.
All right. Okay, Mr. Sanchez.
I'm in favor of this as long as there's not any documentation that requires more staff time to go through, just a simple checkbox.
I suspect it's going to be an on your honor question.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any way to go back in time and see if somebody had their lights on or off and
Right.
the door locked or unlocked.
You need more
But the
staff.
applications will be submitted with attestations requiring that they be factually accurate such that if we can prove it wasn't a legitimate application, we would have recourse down the road. All right, so that, okay, so to summarize what we talked about today as it relates to the summary, we're going to clarify paragraphs 4 and 5 to split out the difference between the $20,000 and the $10,000 grant. We're going to add language that requires some attestation of hardship and includes a question as to whether the business was impacted by the close down order that we discussed. Other criteria that was, they had to be open for business as of August 1st. And with those changes, I think that's the consent, those are the summary of the modifications that we talked about. Any other clarifications? All right, do you have significant direction on that?
We do. So we'll have a revised executive summary for the small business grant program ready to distribute at tomorrow's special board meeting.
Okay. All right, now, don't lose the train of thought because we're going to come back to a resolution that hopefully we can move on. The next executive summary that was distributed was also an attachment to the draft resolution that talked about not-profit or non-for-profit grant programs. And this was prepared at the request or with the direction of this committee from last week's meeting. Just to summarize, the eligibility was determined by the entity being a 501c3 qualified entity, that the entity delivered services, was located in Kane County. Primary mission of services were shelter, housing, sustenance, health services. Really a mental health component is what we had stressed for the available entities. And that the entity be in good standing again, and we should qualify and open for business, I would guess. We could add that to that too, because we want to make sure they're still providing those services. Maybe open for business isn't the appropriate term, but we would use language to that effect in the not-profit context.
Do you want to use that same date, August 1?
Yes, is that fair for everyone? Okay. All right, any questions on this? Again, we put the restriction in here. We got $2 million in available funds. We've heard Hesed House today with their request. It's going to be probably in excess of $500,000 alone. And I know there's a lot more agencies out there that have applications coming. So any other changes to this program that anyone would want to suggest? Or this executive summary? If not, then what I'd ask that we do is, as a committee, authorize the advancement of the resolution that's in the packet here to the special county board meeting for approval tomorrow, with the business grant program being modified as we discussed previously, and the not-for-profit grant program being modified as we discussed. Simply, the only modification to that was the requirement that they be operating as of August 1 of this year. Is there a motion to do that? Mr. Fraz moves. Mr. Sanchez seconds. You know, I mean, this is really hard given the amount of moving parts to it, but I think if we get this before the board, then we can have Mr. McMahon, as he's going to show us, give us a timeline that we can adopt as well. And you'll see that our goal of getting these out in an expeditious way is going to be somewhat limited by the time frame for applications. But any discussion on the resolution is submitted? Hearing none, clerk, can you please call the roll?
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Fraz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
O'Shea.
Yes. All right, the resolution is approved. All right, next on the agenda, status of notice to fire districts and other governmental entities. Mr. McMahon, you indicated that those notices went out.
They did, yes.
Okay. You know, I guess at this point, what we could do is address the concerns raised by the library district as a permissible applicant. We had discussed previously the entities that fell into that category. I think that the funds that we've allocated to the other governmental entities will likely be consumed, but the, you know, a couple options. We could keep our current program the way it is, which did not include the library districts. We could make an exception to include the library districts. We could allocate some funds based on, you know, we do have a contingency fund that we set up that hasn't been used yet, but was, you know, proposed to be kept intact to see how what the response is to the initial applications that we had approved before. So I just want to, in fairness to the library districts, and you know, the challenge in doing these grants is just like we have when we deal with the riverboat grants. It's not a decision as to the importance or the necessity of the districts that are being served. It's just an issue of allocation of the funds that were given to us for this specific purpose and the prioritization. So it's always difficult to say there's not money for a worthy organization. We heard a couple different comments today. Ms. Rosenthal's comment about Will County approving $15,000 per district. We've got 11 districts plus or minus. And then we heard the request or the comment from Gail Borden district that indicated they had 88,000 in expenses. So that just gives you some idea what the range could be, but I'll open it up for discussion, at least at the committee now, as to what the feeling is regarding the request for the library districts to be included. Mr. Frost?
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem just to kind of see how things go if we did want to include them in the not-for-profit program, and then if we have to supplement it either from the set aside or from other funds that aren't used. Although we do specify that, you know, you have to be a 501c3, so we would have to, I assume the library districts are not 501c3.
They're taxing bodies. I don't think they would be.
So you know, we would have to amend that. I would hope that the request would be more in line with the 15,000 than the 88. Because, you know, I don't know if all districts have the same policies, but locally here, you know, the libraries pretty much shut their doors. So I can't imagine that the expenses are too excessive. But as far as reopening expenses and things like that, I would support it because I really don't think it's going to add up to a tremendous amount of money in the big scheme of things here.
Mr. Kenyon.
I would like to see us add the libraries and provide enough funds to help them. It's an essential part of our life, our libraries. And they said books were dead, but they're not. They use the internet. I go by the Elgin Library weekly, and the lot is full of people using it. So I'd be remiss to see us not support them.
All right,
Provide more money so they can
I would suggest that if we're going to do this, instead of modifying the existing programs that we have in play, I mean, that changing it to the not-for-profit category, that we create a supplemental funding from the contingency fund, maybe with a dollar amount consistent with what Will County did, for, times 12 or whatever, fund it for that amount, and just have that be added as another criteria of applicant. We could certainly add that to the other governmental bodies category, and then include libraries as permissive applicants with a maximum amount that we agree on. And I'm not suggesting 15 is correct, but that's what a neighboring county has done. So that would give you some ability to do that. When I say that, and knowing that I've received multiple calls from individuals representing history centers within the county, waiting for the details for how they can apply for their grant application. And they provide a important service as well. So just know that could be coming here, as we go through this process.
John, I would support your motion.
So you're moving, Mr.
I am moving.
Are you going to put a limit on that or
15,000.
Okay, so Mr. Surges is making a motion that we modify the other governmental body pool of funding by adding $180,000 in funding from our contingency fund to establish a program that would allow library districts to apply for grants for qualified COVID-related expenses in an amount not to exceed $15,000 each. Mr. Kenyon seconds that?
It's not enough.
All right.
I would amend it to raise it.
Well, all right, first of all, we have a motion made by Mr. Surges. Does someone like to second that? Mr. Frost. All right, now we can discuss the motion.
I would amend it to increase it because you look at the people that are served. Gail Borden serves 144,000 people, and the Fox River serves 70,000. And then you come down here to Caneville, 1,300.
Well, I would expect they'd serve 550,000 or however many residents are in Kane County, right?
Oh,
The library districts.
well, no. Well, I mean, they have boundaries.
But if we're talking about serving residents of Kane County, it would include the entire population.
You don't think we're going to go down to Caneville to use their library?
My
I'm saying that-
constituents do.
I'm just saying, it's not enough for the bigger districts. 15,000 is not enough.
All right, so we have a program that's 15,000 each. And you're moving to amend it. What is your motion?
I would say up to, I don't want to be ridiculous, but maybe up to 50,000, not to exceed. And then the little ones won't be able to get that because they haven't spent it. I think the bigger districts need more money to do their jobs.
Mr. Berger, do you have comment at this point?
I have a friendly suggestion. So we just launched our application cycle for other units of government.
Right.
And that's earmarked specifically for park districts, townships, and the forest preserve. My friendly suggestion would be for you to increase the funding for that program and
That's
have
what
us, notify the libraries immediately that they can apply. And then that'll all come back to you and you can sort through how much funding to allocate for each of the entities.
That was the motion that was made. The only clarifying to that would be to supplement the allocated amount that we've already done to those by 180,000, which would be 12 times 15. Mr. Kenyon's suggesting that we make it 600,000 because the maximum would be 50,000. All right, so that's his motion. Is there a second to his motion? All right, dies for lack of a second. All right, is there any suggestion, Mr.
Well, I think maybe
Cross.
Mike does have a point in that, do we have to make a blanket 15,000 for any district that asks? I wouldn't be opposed to doing $250,000 in a pot to be requested and doled out as needed.
So you want to put
Second
a,
Drew's motion.
so you're suggesting that we modify the motion to eliminate the $15,000 maximum per district, but have a total pool of 250,000. And once we get the applications in, then we'll figure out, and that'll be for libraries only, that pool.
Correct.
And then we'll see what's requested versus what's available and make a determination at that point.
Agreed.
We're going in the right direction.
That's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, Mr. Surges, seconds. Further discussion. Mr. Hanson.
We can say 150, 250, 500, $1 million. My concern is that there will be applicants from every category of this program. They're gonna have requests that exceed what we allocate for them. And to instantly say, let's increase the funding, let's go dip into the contingency fund is kind of a dangerous road to continue to go down. I'm in support of doing something for the library districts, but the answer can't always be, let's go dip into the contingency fund until we see the entire pool of applicants and eligible applicants for all these categories.
Mr. Sanchez.
I'm comfortable with dipping into the contingency fund only because I'm realizing that the municipal asks aren't going to come into the full amounts. I think Carpentersville is a good example. They had upwards of $2 million they could ask for, and I believe they're coming in around 150, 160,000, somewhere like that. I don't know that all municipalities are going to be the same, but we're going to have some extra money that can then go into to replenish the contingency bucket of what we're doing here. So I'm comfortable with this motion, and 250 is the number I was thinking myself.
That's
based
correct.
on some math. So
All right, so we have an amendment. Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll. The amendment is to add library districts as a permissible applicant under our other governmental bodies section, and to supplement that with, instead of 180,000, which was suggested in the original motion, this to 250 total to be allocated among the library districts, depending on what we get in applications. We'll figure that out at the time.
And that comes out of that additional.
That comes out of the
250.
contingency fund.
Thank you.
All right, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Fries.
Yes.
Sanchez,
yes.
Surges.
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
O'Shea.
Yes. All right, now we have the motion is amended to vote on. Any further discussion on the motion as amended? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Fries.
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges. Thomas,
Yes.
O'Shea.
Yes. All right, so that, just as a procedural matter, that will not go to the special board meeting tomorrow. That will go as a recommendation from this committee to the executive committee for passage at our next board meeting. Right?
Actually, we had tracked that resolution through Wednesday's Finance Committee agenda, then executive, then board. But we'll work with the Finance Department to make the change that you
That's
have
fine.
requested to that.
In other words, it'll go
item.
through the normal process. Doesn't mean a delay in the process, but
No,
I guess the only issue is to the extent that the notice going out to library districts of them being permissible applicants, in fairness, we would have to wait to do that until the board met. Correct?
I don't know that you have to wait.
Okay.
I think that you run the risk of notifying potential applicants of an opportunity that is withdrawn from them if the board doesn't approve that.
Right.
I would suggest to you that because time is of the essence.
That's my inclination.
My
And
recommendation.
obviously, I'm not going to change my vote on this, but as long as the library districts understand we're doing our best that we can and we'll do that, then I think when we send the request out of them or to them, we should identify that they're potentially permissible applicants and to begin the
And then-
process. We wouldn't want to end their time frame for application until after the board met.
So we can indicate to them that they're out there pending up board approval, they're considered eligible. The timeline that we've established has the deadline for submission, I believe, September 1st for other units of government. So they would be asked
They
to
would-
complete an application and submit it by the 1st of September.
Even though the program wasn't approved by then?
And given the reality of the timeframe, that's all we can do. We'll send out an email that, kind of reflects your discussion today, that you may be eligible for a funding opportunity to submit your application on or before or before September 1.
Right.
And then if the full board does not support the resolution that leaves this committee, we'll send another email to the library districts that says there's no longer a funding opportunity available to you.
All right.
So what's September 1? Yeah.
Okay,
We've got a
so
little
we're
more
fine
time.
on that
We're
then.
okay,
All right,
right.
okay.
But
Ms. Thomas?
September 1 is a webinar for the other, and we'll get an invite out to the library districts as well.
Great. Ms. Thomas?
I mean, what was just described makes sense, but I'm sorry if I missed it. Why can't we get this on the agenda for tomorrow?
Because it's not on the agenda that was posted.
Okay,
We didn't anticipate that this was going to be an action item today.
okay.
That what we had anticipated was the business and not-for-profit grant program would be on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, Doug, I have a question. If that's Doug
Mr.
Sheffler. Yes. So I thought we were extending the municipal deadline from September 4th to either the 11th or the following week.
We discussed doing that, but we chose not to at this point, knowing that we could extend it as time goes on, pending a change in the regulations between now and then, because we wanted to be prepared to act immediately if the regulations change favorably.
And the
So-
municipalities can submit an amended application up to October 15th. So they're going to have some flexibility with what they submit to us.
So what do you mean an amended application? I mean, is it, they could ask for more money?
Okay, so you've made formula allocations to the 28 municipalities. Those are like block grants that you've given out. We are trying to assist the municipalities with full utilization of their awards. And to that end, we anticipated they may not be able to put a comprehensive budget together for the full utilization of their award. Therefore, we've asked them to submit an initial budget by September 4th, but we've communicated to them that they have the opportunity to come back and submit additional items to be reimbursed with their award amount. And we're giving them until the 15th of October because we want to be able to come back to you and let you know if any of those communities can't fully utilize their award so that you can make decisions on how to reprogram those dollars.
So would those dollars stay, in the Elgin slot, so to speak, until October?
Those dollars, so $5 million has been awarded and changed to the city of Elgin. It's up to the city of Elgin now to put together a comprehensive budget for how those funds will be used. And they will have between now and September or October 15th to do that. In the event they can't fully utilize the amount, we will inform the committee and ask it what it wants us to do with those dollars.
So I know they're also incurring these expenses as we speak. So,
Right.
I mean,
So what we've asked all the communities to do is give us two budgets. One is for all their expenses going back to the beginning of the pandemic through, I believe it's August 31st. And then the second budget attachment on their application is their projection for what they expect to need in the way of funding for coronavirus-related expenses. So we're anticipating every municipality there'll be two components to their funding commitment from the county. One will be a reimbursement budget for past expenses, and one will be a budget plan for future expenses.
So if I can ask one more question. So if Carpentersville is only requesting 150,000 out of a $2 million allocation, will we, either Scott or our consultant, be working with them to help them realize more of those funds? I mean, that's what I think should be done.
We've invited all the communities to reach out to us for technical assistance if they need it, and some already have.
Thank you.
But just to be clear, our goal is to help them find eligible expenses and fully utilize their award from you.
Agreed.
All right, any further questions? We have we have a motion and a second for the resolution is amended, or are we done with that?
We're done with that.
We're done with that?
We voted twice, I
Did
believe.
we vote twice on the, okay, we did. Okay, so we don't need, we're good with that. I think the only other items for discussion today would be then the feedback we received from Mr. Onzik's office regarding the county requests. These are additional requests. We had missed, we have a list of those that were provided to us. We had asked that the elected officials or department heads prioritize their requests in numeric order based on importance to them. And so did everyone have a chance to, or receive that list, have a chance to review it? What is the pleasure of the committee? Do we want to discuss this today, or do we want to move this to our next meeting? All right. Mr. Hanson?
Is it your intention to propose a meeting of the CAT committee before the Labor Day weekend, which would give us a chance to get something into the mix for our regularly scheduled board meeting? If not, then we've got to go through it today.
All right, I think where we're at right now, just to discuss the global scenario, is we've dealt with the allocations between the county and the municipalities. We created the municipalities program, we created the other governmental entities program. We're now moving forward with the business program and the not-for-profit program. The last significant item of business for us before we let the applications go out and come back in are going to be prioritizing the county expenses. Now, right now, the county application for expenses that we've approved to date is in the process of being vetted. So we do need to get this done at some point. This could be the topic for one meeting. Bear with me as I'm trying to look at my calendar here. Is Labor Day the 6th, 7th? All right, so next Monday is the 31st. I mean, we could have a meeting next Monday or Tuesday, whatever the preference of the committee would be. At the
Just
same
another day.
time
on
to
the
do
farm.
this, have this as our agenda item. I think, let's have some initial discussion, though. I mean, the bottom line is we have about $10 million more in requests than available funds, or 8 million, I forgot the exact number. And so what we need to do is pare this list down. The total request remaining is 18 million. Mr. Onzik, do you recall the number that's available and unallocated? Okay, we have 12 million. I'm sorry, it's not as drastic then. We have 18 million in requests and 12 million in available funds. So it's going through this list and coming up with a consensus program. And obviously, we can have a workshop to do that. I don't think that process, well, I think we've gotten enough feedback from staff. We've had all the staff in the elected offices make their presentations, and we now have their prioritization. So the work is for us to go through it.
There
Mr.
might be some items that would have to be ordered sooner rather than later.
Right.
That's what this young man's going to say there.
Okay, but the challenge is that as a practical matter, unless we're going to have another special board meeting, we need to get this at the next board meeting for sure. Unless we're going to have a special board meeting, we're not going to have approval for this anyway. We can have preliminary approval, but not final approval. Right? Mr. Frost?
Yeah, I guess when I mentioned last week that we let staff come back to us with reductions, my hope is that they would, we've got basically, we need a 33% reduction in asks. And I was hoping and felt that staff would be in a better position to pare those down than us, arbitrarily going through the list and making our best efforts. So I guess I'm a little disappointed that the asks weren't pared down, because no matter how you look at it, there's only so much money. So if the askers aren't going to do it, then the people on this committee will have to work through it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm not a fan of this approach, but it's an option. I mean, I'm not sure why we didn't get the top 3 to 5 priorities that we asked for, but we can always just do an across-the-board cut.
Well, one of the challenges in doing that is that some of these are all or nothing expenditures. So for example, if we're going to replace our radios, you're not going to replace half of them unless the sheriff has the other money in his budget elsewhere.
But I think the point is, okay, across the board cut, this is how much money you have left. Now you decide where it goes.
Well, the other concern, of course, is that we have different individuals. So to say to them, all right, Sheriff, you decide what's the top priority. Take into account your concern about IT and the animal control and everything else. You can't have them prioritize expenditures collectively as to what's most important for the county. I think that's our job. Mr. McMahon, do you have a comment on this?
Well, no, I mean, I stepped up because there is another item on the agenda about a budget resolution that I'd like you to address for
Okay.
the overall. That's item, I think it's 5A on your agenda, so I would ask you to take that up and consider that, so we can move that along to the full board.
All right. We'll get to that then when we conclude the discussion on this. So I would say if we're going to take a deeper look at this list of items, and I think we come up with a priority. I think you could actually come up with some of the major projects now that, for example, I'm going to pick on Roger, but Roger has listed his projects in order of priority. If there's some that have to be cut there, the higher you would want to reduce the highest priority, or the lowest, well, the highest numbered priority, I guess. And as we go through that, you could do the same analysis for every other department. All right, let's talk about the budget resolution. Mr. McMahon, what resolution was that you wanted us to address?
This establishes a budget for Fund, 353.
Is that in our packet here
It
today?
is in your packet, yes.
All right. So this is the resolution for, what is the substance of the resolution?
Well, it establishes a budget for the allocation of the county's 92.9 plus the amount that we've earned in interest.
All right, that was included in the email that came from Mr. Onzik
Yes.
earlier? Yes, okay.
Yes.
I apologize. I have that right here in front of me.
Under new business, and which item?
5A.
5-1, or 5, yes, 1A or whatever, 5A. All right, so we need to move this resolution along to, this is really a housekeeping matter for the budget adjustment. Mr. Fraz moves, Mr. Sanchez seconds. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to do a roll call, please.
She loves roll call, yeah.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes?
Raz,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Surges, Thomas,
Yes.
O'Shea,
Yes. All right, so that resolution is going to go on to the full board for consideration. All right, so as far as meeting time for next week, is Monday the same time good for this group, the 31st?
What about the rest of these resolutions?
I think they're placeholders for items that we could consider. The we moved item number 3 already. That got moved to the special meeting tomorrow. 4 and 2 and 4 are moot. Mr. Hanson.
Just had one question for the state's attorney's office. I don't intend to go through every single non-payroll funding request prioritization item, But are there any items there that at first blush or perhaps with more detailed review that you would question as being eligible? I don't want to cut things out of that list for departments that have a need and then find out that other requests down the line are ineligible.
Okay, so I don't have any backup documentation for the items that are listed on the non-payroll funding requests. I have forwarded this spreadsheet that I think you have in front of you with the priorities to KEB for their input as well. And I think what will happen is that we will require the offices or departments to submit supporting documentation, just like we're asking for from the municipalities, other units of local government, et cetera. So I can't sit here and say, you know, item number whatever is blatantly eligible or ineligible. It's just, I don't have backup support to give you an answer on that.
And you understand my concern to possibly prioritize within this committee and cut requests that are eligible, and then we find out that some of the things that we gave the blessing to are not eligible.
Ms. Thomas.
So at the last meeting, there was some discussion about getting guidance around capital, since the Treasury's summary or guidance does not speak to capital expenditures one way or the other. Are we still waiting on that? Like capital expenditures outside of just, like computers for remote working and all that, but other capital expenditures.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So you're talking about new buildings and new vehicles and?
Correct.
It's going to depend on the supporting documentation and what the purpose is.
I don't think the guidelines have changed since our last meeting. There's been no clarification of the Treasury regulations. So anything we approve will have to go through the process. And I would say that if we cut, the department heads have put their priorities here in the office holders. If we cut other programs and we end up having some of their programs not approved, then we're going to have to deal with that with the rest of the contingency funds we have at the end of the program. All right, so next Monday at 2:30, if no one objects, we'll have that as our next meeting date. And I'd ask that everyone review this and come up with suggestions. Maybe we can do independent homework on this and hopefully reach a consensus next week.
John, I have
Barb?
a quick question before you adjourn. Did the applications go out already for the townships, park districts, and forest preserves?
I think you addressed that right at the
Then-
beginning. Yes.
Okay, when are they due back the same time, the municipal applications?
All right.
That's the answer?
Yep.
Okay.
And can you tell us how did the notifications go out, Joe? Did they go out regular mail package or email or?
All went out email.
All went out email. Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Fraz moves, Mr. Sanchez seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Deb. I'm on it. It's usually too cold.